is Weston, the fourth generation Yonsei. Get that. And he graduated from law school. Matt, hi. Here's one. Right now, he is taking on a variety of legal roles. Um, just massive work around the unjust, and Weston is there. What I believe is doing amplifying the voices and really speaking up for the people who might be voiceless. So I want to welcome Weston. Sorry. I take my time. Weston, whom I got to meet through Epworth United Methodist Church. I also want to mention Weston was the big driver, the leader of helping Epworth become a reconciling congregation, which was a very, very lengthy journey. But so I'm just so grateful that you're here, Weston. So come on out. Oh, wait, hold on. Just kidding.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. My remarks won't be too lengthy, and I want to have time for you to ask me questions because I hope that what I tell you will inspire some amount of discussion, and I want to kind of help to lead that discussion in a direction that will be most helpful to you, because I don't know where you are on your journey of kind of discovering what inclusivity means, how we can be more equitable in our society. But I sense from what I've seen so far that this is a very inclusive, very warm, welcoming congregation, and I very much appreciate the hospitality I've received so far. So thank you very much. Pastor Anna asked me to choose a verse from the Bible to present to you today, and I chose the message of the Syrophoenician women. It's a story that appears in the book of Mark, also in the book of Matthew, pretty much identical in both versions. But what strikes me about this verse is when you read it, you're almost taken aback a bit, and you're almost left with this feeling like, are we nothing but dogs deserving of scraps from the table? I mean, the Syrophoenician woman appearing in both Mark and Matthew seems to challenge the notion of Jesus as this perfect Christ. And indeed, Jesus appears to callously reject the woman initially, comparing her to a dog, and only relents begrudgingly when the woman insists on receiving dog food off the table. I think scholarly consensus suggests that Jesus was merely acting, role-playing, cosplaying, whatever you want to call it, basically cosplaying the religious authorities of the time and testing the sincerity of the Syrophoenician woman's faith. And that ultimately, the Syrophoenician woman persists. Jesus does heal her daughter. And in doing so, Jesus draws this stark contrast between his inclusive ministry and the more exclusive ministry of other religious authorities of the time. I'm not totally sold on the scholarly consensus here. Surely if Jesus was merely role-playing the devil's advocate, so to speak, teasing or testing the Syrophoenician women, Mark and Matthew could have clarified that point with some sort of wink-wink emoji or JK or whatever the equivalent was in ancient Greek. But Mark nor Matthew suggests that Jesus was merely playing the devil's advocate. And more to the point, even if Jesus was playing the devil's advocate and sort of cosplaying the religious authorities at that time, I think that moment would have been a pretty cruel moment to test her faith. I mean, after all, the Syrophoenician woman's daughter was very much suffering, afflicted with what we would understand as a mental illness. I favor a slightly more literal reading that I think is fully consistent with our understanding of the Trinity and the nature of God. We can conceptualize God as all-knowing and all-compassionate, while recognizing that Jesus, our God in human form, has the capacity for compassion that is necessarily limited by our human imagination. the way we think about God absent divine intervention in the form of Christ's return is necessarily limited by what we can imagine as possible. And our imagine for inclusivity expands over time as we realize the inclusivity of the gospel message. If we're completely honest with ourselves, the gospel today looks very different than the gospel of 200 years ago. Gospel of 200 years ago justified chattel slavery. Our imagination for inclusivity expands and we become closer to a vision of equity. So I think Jesus is sincere in expressing annoyance towards the Syrophoenician woman. I think in that moment, Jesus was genuinely annoyed. But his imagination for inclusivity expands in that moment as well with his interaction. And he sets an example that we too can expand our imagination for inclusivity if we step back and we critically examine our prejudices. The message of the Syrophoenician woman resonates with me in particular as a person who once experienced kind of a form of time travel. And when I say time travel, I'm not referring to a literal time machine, but an ability to empathize in kind of an ethereal way with the struggles of my ancestors who came to Portland, Oregon from Japan in 1915. I will say that, 98 years after my ancestors immigrated to Portland, one of their descendants, me, found himself in a mental hospital. I will tell you that in 2013, I don't have perfect memory of what happened, but I found myself in a situation where I was brought to the hospital and civilly committed. I can tell you that the experience of being in a hospital and not being allowed to leave a room is not unlike being incarcerated. There's a camera on the ceiling that looks at you 24/7, and you're basically escorted to the bathroom, watched as you use the bathroom, escorted back to your room. It's a very restrictive experience. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the civil commitment process in Oregon, you are entitled to a public defender. So if they want to, in fact, civilly commit you, you do have a right to a hearing before a judge where that public defender will represent you. I can tell you that at that time, this is back in 2013, my public defender was very resigned, very tired, very overworked. And he very much didn't believe I had a case, nor could he articulate my options in a way that I could understand as someone who is culturally Japanese and culturally American. There's a lot of ways to conceptualize culture, and one of the ways we can conceptualize culture is that certain cultures have an affinity for higher power distance, and some cultures have an affinity for lower power distance. What I mean by that is that cultures with a higher power distance structure tend to place more emphasis on hierarchy and authority, respecting those in authority, and cultures with lower power distance place less emphasis on hierarchy. They have flatter hierarchies, less emphasis on respecting authority. And for me, I needed someone who was culturally competent enough to be able to explain that I had this right to a hearing and that I could, in fact, fight my civil commitment without necessarily offending the doctors or, telling the doctors, I don't like you. I don't think your diagnosis of schizophrenia is correct. But I didn't have that sort of culturally competent public defender. And in the end, he basically encouraged me to acquiesce to that commitment, which I did. So, cultural competency in the legal profession is vital in order to ensure that people get the due process that the law entitles them to. And I will say that in the civil commitment context, due process is already extremely limited. So what little due process you get is extremely valuable. When I say that the experience was a bit of like time travel, I remember sitting in my room And thinking back to my ancestors and thinking about what they went through when they first came to the United States, the prejudice and the discrimination that they faced to make it in a Portland that is very different than the Portland we see today. You know, my great grandfather on my dad's side, he came to Portland in 1915. He worked as a street cleaner for many years, and he eventually saved up some money, also received some money from his family back in Japan. He went to dental school. He became a dentist at the Northwest Pacific School of Dentistry, which today is part of OHSU. And he worked as a dentist in Portland for many years, from the 1920s, 1930s. And the struggles that he went through to make it as a dentist in Portland were immense. The struggle to even buy the equipment that a dentist needs to do his profession well. And to imagine all of that work yanked out from under you and having to start over from square one is something I could hardly even fathom until I myself was in that situation. You see, prior to being civilly committed, I was a college student. I was an undergraduate student, and I was hoping to become a doctor. You know, I was pre-med as a college student, and I was doing quite well. And over time, I started to hear things that other people could not hear. I started to hear footsteps that other people couldn't hear, knocking on the door that other people couldn't hear. And it was very scary. And I think that people's response to that is very visceral. It's very reactive. People don't tend to view that with the compassion that you would expect or that someone in that situation would hope for, but with fear, this idea that, oh no, you know, he's falling apart, we need to get him help, etc. And that sort of compassion that I may not understand what you're hearing because I can't hear it, but that sort of, I may not be able to hear what you hear, but I'm with you, I support you, and I want to help you. That's something that was missing. I think similarly, my ancestors, they experienced a world that other people around them couldn't experience, and that they were minoritized. They were viewed as something other. Obviously, they were Japanese American. They had eyes that looked different. Their skin was of darker complexion. They viewed the world and they moved in the world in a way that other people could not experience. But compassion, the idea that I may not be able to experience your world, but I support you. And whatever you need, I want to help you get there. That goes a long way. Many of you are familiar with the history that comes next, which is, you know, on December 7th, 1941, the Empire of Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. And what happened for most Japanese Americans is, you know, they were put under routine surveillance. And the next year, 1942, around spring, summer, they were shipped off to internment camps in inland America. However, before the attack on Pearl Harbor, and evidence suggests that even as early as 1939, the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover had compiled a list of people that they believed were especially dangerous to the United States national intelligence. And so starting in around 1939, the FBI was compiling this list, and this was years before Pearl Harbor even happened. That list of Japanese men also included some German nationals and Italian nationals, but that list of foreign nationals, at least vis-a-vis the Japanese American community, included Japanese language teachers, it included Buddhist monks, priests, even some Christian pastors, It included doctors, medical doctors. It included dentists. And the common thread in that list were that these were people that had standing in the Japanese American community. So if you're a dentist or a medical doctor or a Japanese language teacher or a Buddhist priest, right? These are roles that elevate you in that community. And so the FBI had a list of all the people who were in those high-ranking roles. And that list was really robust. It was maybe 800 people long. And hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, FBI agents fanned out all over the country, and they arrested every single person on that list, including my great-grandfather, who was a dentist here in Portland. My great-grandfather, on the night of December 7th, was watching a play at a theater in what is today Old Town. He stepped outside of the theater, and FBI agents immediately jumped on him, put him in handcuffs, put him in a car, and drove him away. And my great-grandmother, my grandfather, the rest of the children had no idea where their father went. No idea. They didn't hear from him. So this happened December 7th. Didn't hear from him until December 24th. So there were 3 weeks where they had no idea where he was. Was he alive? Was he dead? What happened to him? The FBI had taken him away to Montana, to a prison in Montana. And from there, the FBI shuttled him to different Department of Justice prisons for interrogation. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be separated from your wife, from your children, and not being told when you'd be able to see them ever again. But I do know it was very hard on the family. They were only able to keep in touch via writing letters, and they did write letters to each other, which were all censored. And we have those letters. They're preserved at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and you can read them there if you'd like. But they tell the story of people who are resilient, people who understand that what is out of their control is out of their control, but they're going to make the best of a very difficult situation. I think that one of the big takeaways that I get from that experience is that you won't always have the ally at your side to help you through these situations. But you do have that sense of resiliency that you can lean on from your ancestors and from the hope that they brought to this country. And I will say that there is a happy ending to this, which is after 2 years being shuttled from prison to prison, he was reunited with his family in 1943 at the internment camp Minidoka in Idaho. And I will also say that he probably was able to do that because there were people who were advocating for him on the outside. My great-grandfather, my great-grandmother, my paternal relatives were regular attendees at the Japanese Methodist Church, which is today Epworth United Methodist Church in Southeast. And they had white allies on the outside who were able to advocate for him and tell the FBI, this person is not a threat to the national security, despite what you think. And those actions, they do matter. The things that you can do to help people who are in a difficult place matter. I will say that even people who are trained in how to work with people from diverse cultures, people you would expect to be very culturally competent, are not always so. When I was at the hospital and ready to be discharged, I remember having this conversation with a social worker who was in the process of discharging me. And this was back in 2013. I was very distraught, very depressed. And, you know, she was like encouraging me to apply for a Social Security disability and telling my parents I would never graduate college, I would never get a regular job. But that wasn't really my primary concern. I was lonely, and I was asked her, will I ever have a wife? Will I ever get married? Will I ever be able to find someone in this world who will be my number one and who I can be number one for? And she said, "Oh, of course, there are plenty of women who have mental illness just like you." And so, and she's a social worker. I mean, she went to social work school, but that was her prejudice. That was how she felt. Um, and and she wanted to support me clearly. But that was not what I needed at that time, clearly. I think, really doing some self-reflection, examining your prejudices, even if you've worked with populations that have mental illness, struggle with mental health challenges, you know, you can become very complacent. And, this social worker did not tell me what I wanted to hear at that moment. Um, but, I don't think she was a bad person. She's just doing the best that she could. And so, obviously there's a happy ending to that story too, which is that I did graduate college. I went to law school. I became a lawyer. I work as a public defender now. And I can be that public defender that I didn't have when I was civilly committed. And I can help people understand their options, which in our system are often very limited options. But the ability to exercise even a modicum of agency in a system that is inherently designed to limit that agency is so very important. I tell every client that I meet, I'll go to bat for you. I'm on your side. And I also tell every client that I meet, I love you. As a public defender, my clients don't choose me. I don't choose them. The court appoints me, those clients. I don't choose them. They don't choose me. But I make it very clear to every client that I meet, I'm with you until we resolve this case. And you might make my life very difficult. I might get you out of jail, and then you might run away and be on the lam for a few months and then get back into jail, and it'll make my life a lot more difficult, but I'm not going to leave your side. Um, and I've gone to bat for many clients and gotten them out of jail, and only to have them, reoffend and get back in jail again. But I don't judge them. They are in a circumstance I can't understand. They're in a world that I can't understand, but I will always support them. And I think, that message of love is so important. It is the message of the Syrophoenician women. The Syrophoenician woman, you know, also wanted someone who could understand. And Jesus got to that point, not initially, but Jesus did get to that point, and we can too. And that's my message for you. So I'll open it up to questions if you have any. My message, as I said before, was very brief, but if there's anyone who has a question, I'm happy to take it. Yeah. What needs to happen to fix the shortage of public defenders is that there's two things that need to happen. First of all, we need to stop arresting so many people. The fact that we have a shortage of public defenders is because there's an overcriminalization of behavior that is caused by people in desperate situations. So, I mean, I have a client who is facing a theft 3 charge, which is like the pettiest misdemeanor you can imagine. He's facing that charge because he stole soup cans from a Winco. Um, you know, he's not stealing diamonds. And I mean, these are soup cans. I mean, clearly he wanted to eat. Um, so like, is that a good use of our resources to be prosecuting theft 3 for someone who's stealing soup cans from a Winco? I don't think so. And I think that there are better use of the resources we actually have than, prosecuting every case. But there's also a lot of blowback against Mike Schmidt, who is being painted as being soft on crime. He's our district attorney, and he's being painted as soft on crime by his election opponent. And so there's that blowback. He wants to show that he's being tough on crime, so he's prosecuting every case he possibly can. But it doesn't help the public defender shortage. So that's number one. Number two is that you actually have to pay public defenders what you pay prosecutors. And the fact of the matter is we don't. Prosecutors' starting salary is like 100K. Starting salary for a public defender is going to be like 67, 70K. That's a 30% disparity. So if you're, fresh out of law school and you're interested in criminal law, you're going to be drawn to prosecution, because you make more money. But that's, and people complain, well, why should, people who are committing all these crimes, get, a high quality lawyer? And that's the wrong question. First of all, it's what due process demands. That's why. But second of all, you're assuming that the people who committed all these crimes have actually committed those crimes. I can tell you many of my clients are totally innocent, totally innocent. And even those that are not totally innocent, are they not also deserving of love and of second chances and of mercy and compassion? We don't invest the resources that due process demands into our public defense system. So that's number two. And then number three, it's just kind of a political will issue. Closely related to number two, there's a lot of people who ask me, how do you represent those people? And there's always that emphasis on the word those. And I hate that. I hate that because it assumes a priori that those people are guilty, which is by far and away not true. Many of them are quite innocent. But it also assumes that those people are somehow different than you and me. And they're not. You know, I can't say that I would be any different, in stealing those soup cans if I was really hungry. I can't judge people in that situation. So those people are human beings. 100% of them are human beings, believe it or not. But there's not that political will. As long as people in the general population can ask the question, how do you represent those people? There isn't the political will. And politicians know that. Tina Kotek knows that. And that's why you don't see a lot of energy in Salem to fully invest in public defense. Yeah, go ahead. Yes and no. So in Oregon, if you have certain mental illnesses, and it's usually a psychotic mental illness, and you're so removed from the reality that we share that you can't understand the legal proceedings, then the defense attorney raises that to the court and you get put on an aid and assist docket, and we call that mental health court. But it's not really an alternate process per se, because the end result of mental health court is that either you are restored to competency, which means you went to the state hospital or you went to some other treatment provider and you got mental health treatment and you're restored to competency, so you can understand the process and you can participate in the normal process, or you're not. And if you're not restored to competency, then after being hospitalized for a year, you're released. So not really. The goal of mental health court is to restore people to competency so they can participate in regular court. And if that doesn't happen, then they get a year of treatment at the state hospital and they're released. There is. And, there's a lot of talk about like, how can we make it better? How can we, address mental health issues? I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have the, golden BB, as it were. I will say that it's complicated. But fundamentally, we know what people need. They need housing, they need food, they need community. But instead of giving people what they need, we give them the opposite, which is shame, incarceration, and punishment, right? So, like, fundamentally, we know what human beings need to thrive, but we just don't give them that. We give them the opposite of that. And I tell everyone our criminal justice system basically is America's social safety net of last resort. Because if you don't die, which is a real possibility, I've had many clients die, but if you don't die, there is one social safety net that will catch you for sure, and that's the criminal justice system. But it's a crappy social safety net because, again, it doesn't give you what you need, it gives you the opposite of what you need, and it sets you up to reoffend. Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack there. First of all, I think first of all, I think what you're referring to, the first part of your question is Measure 110. So Measure 110 decriminalize small amounts of drug possession. And there's a big push politically to recriminalize drug possession, which I don't think is a good use of resources. I really don't. And philosophically, I'm just opposed to forcing people to get treatment who don't want treatment. I think in my world, a better solution to quote unquote clean up the streets would be to set up centers where people could receive pharmaceutical grade substances that they're addicted to in a safe environment. Um, and I doubt that will ever happen because we don't have the political will for that. But people who are addicted, it's a mental illness, it's a disease, and in order to function normally, they need that substance, whether it's heroin or any other substance. Unfortunately, in order to get that substance, they have to buy it from people who are selling it illegally, right? So that fuels crime. I mean, ideally, you would want to set up centers where people could get that substance legally, um, and be able to use it in a safe way under medical supervision. And if they're willing and wanting to end their use of that substance, that they have the resources and tools to do it. And if they don't want to end their use of that substance, that they continue to use it, but in a safe way, in a way that is not destructive to the community and destructive to people around them. I mean, in terms of, how do you solve mental health? I think you can look at other countries and look at the models that they use. For example, in Europe, I would say that they have a much greater variance, different gradations of restrictions depending on your level of mental illness. Whereas in America, it's basically black and white. You're either out of the mental hospital or you're in it. And if you're in it, you have no freedom and no liberty. And if you're not in it, you have all the liberty, but you don't have any of the help. I can tell you people at Unity who end up there, like they'll be committed, and the commitment lasts 180 days. It can be extended another 180 days, and then it can't be extended. So at maximum, they're at Unity for a year. They get out of Unity, and the Unity develops a discharge plan, which is such a farce because like the discharge plan says, come back to Unity every week to get your medication. It's like they're not going to do that. Like there's no way that they even have the wherewithal to be able to know how to get to Unity once you release them, right? They're going to wander around, and then how do they even get back to Unity to get their medication and to participate in group therapy, all the things that are in their discharge plan. So that's not really helping. It's just a band-aid situation. They'll eventually get recommitted for sure, but until they get recommitted, they're on the street, and people don't like that. So it's a complicated problem. I think we live in a very unique culture we're a multi-ethnic, multicultural country. And so it's hard to find solutions that are compatible with all people at all walks of life. I can tell you in Japan, homelessness is relatively rare, but that's a function of their culture, right? If you lose your job, you lose your house, you lose your income. In Japan, the government will literally call everyone who is related to you by blood, everyone who you have a relationship with blood, and they will politely ask your relatives to take you in. And they will take you in, but it's a very different culture, right? Like we could not do that in the United States for privacy reasons. But in Japan, the government will literally do that. They'll call everyone who's related to you until they find someone who will take you in. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, thank you so much for hosting me. I appreciate your hospitality as always. And thank you for Pastor Anna for inviting me to speak. I really appreciate the opportunity.